Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast, an authoritative source for insights into the city's changing property landscape. In this edition, we turn our discerning eye to a remarkable shift in the market dynamics, presenting a distinct and rare advantage for buyers in the current climate. Today's Toronto real estate market has evolved, stepping away from the frenetic pace of bidding wars and the constraints of inflexible terms. Buyers now find themselves in a position of unprecedented negotiating power. The landscape has shifted, allowing for thoughtful deliberation and strategic decision-making. In our discussion, we'll delve into the nuanced aspects of negotiation extending beyond mere price points. This episode is dedicated to equipping you with a comprehensive toolkit essential for navigating and capitalizing on the current market downturn. And it's not going to last forever, so get in there and make it happen. If you're tuning in today, please don't forget to like, subscribe to, and turn on those notifications. We certainly appreciate your support. My name is Ian Busher. I'm a broker with the Fox Marin team. Please keep her number handy. This is Corey Marin, our in-house hype girl and resident expert listing broker. And this guy is a good man to know, Mr. Ralph Fox, our analytical, investor-driven macro picture watcher. And joining us again, always a pleasure, it's the queen of acquisition, Jessica Rubash. All right, let's jump into this topic. What can buyers potentially leverage in today's market? We've outlined distinct advantages buyers may possess that may not have been available just months earlier. Ralph, if you wouldn't mind leading us off, what can buyers potentially leverage in today's market? What are we all seeing out there? What does this climate look like to us all?
Yeah, I think we're in a situation where everything is changing and there's a lag between oftentimes what the media is reporting and what people's expectations are and what's happening versus actually what's going on in the market. And so we're having all kinds of conversations with buyers and sellers as everybody is trying to adjust to this new shifting paradigm. So we're having lots and lots of conversations, that's for sure. And on the buyer side, there definitely are some great opportunities. However, there's only so far that you can push things in this type of a market because prices still, although softening, and although there's a lot of inventory, the good properties are selling quickly and prices as a whole are remaining firm.
I think the two main points here when it comes to what buyers have the advantage of right now, it's both time, which is a luxury that they never had before, and dialogue, the ability to actually have a dialogue with the seller. Whereas before, people were just kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. Now they can be far more considered about their choices. They can make better long-term decisions because they have the time to really think about it. And then when they decide that it is in fact a good opportunity, you have the ability to have a dialogue with the seller about what price and the terms look like. And that was just unheard of before. And it seems like a baseline right for any buyer, but it is very much a luxury now. And I think that it's such a good thing that buyers actually have that opportunity to be a little bit more discerning, ask those tough questions, and just really take a hard look at the decisions that they're making. I think most normal markets around the world behave this way. And Toronto hasn't seen that probably in the last few decades because we've had such a supply problem. But because we still very much have a quality supply problem, those great opportunities, like Ralph said, are still moving quickly. So I actually tell all of my own clients that regardless of how the market is performing, the best opportunity will always sell within the first 72 hours from what I've observed. And I think that people really underestimate just how many sophisticated buyers are out there. I think everyone comes to the table thinking that they're the only ones that have come up with this brilliant idea to think outside the box and look at an opportunity in a very different way. But I think the reality of the situation is that there are a handful of people that have already thought about that and are going to be ready and willing to compete for that golden opportunity at any given time. So even though buyers have leverage right now, I think there's definitely a limit to how much leverage they have, especially for those great opportunities.
I think that's excellent. So let's just break this down for everyone because we want to arm our viewership with some real tools so that they can wrap their heads around buying in this market. Mm-hmm. And let's break it down into chunks. So let's talk about price first as we sort of kick off because everyone's like, amazing. Just as Ian referenced, an opportunity to get deals out there. I'm going to get 20% off the list price. Walmart pricing, it's time to score. And really, in reality, we're really not seeing prices like that. So to give everybody a bit of a reality check, I'm just going to go through briefly the stats in the 4 categories we often assess when we look at the market watch that comes from TREB, the Toronto Real Estate Board, every month. These numbers are pretty up to date because we're looking at October numbers. And I want to talk about the fact that the average detached house is selling for 100% of the list price as of last month. The average semi-detached house sold for 103% of the list price as of last month. The average townhouse, 100% of the list price. And condos, where we definitely have more supply than we're used to, quality supply, as Jess just referenced, 99% of the list price on average. So we're not seeing 90% of the list price or 92% of the list price. So we're not seeing a lot of undercutting in terms of the eventual sale price. And then when we reflect on prices versus last year, we're looking at detached houses actually up 8.2%, semis up over 4%, townhouses just up over 1%, and condos only down 1.7% versus last year. So I have a question for you, team. When you're talking to your buyers and you are preparing an offer and you're looking at the comparables, the average price per square foot, you're coming up with your offer price, what they should be negotiating from, what time period are you looking at comps? Are you looking at comparables from last month, the summer, last spring, or all the way back to last year at this time? What do you think is a good reference for buyers in terms of what things are selling for today? Jess?
I like to look at both. I think having that context is very important. I think that in hot markets, I would typically focus only on the last 3 months of data. But because we're in a highly volatile market that seems to shift truly by the week, the one thing that buyers should be focusing on when they're comparing market value right now is just the seasonality of this little slump that we're in. And so now I will pull stats from November and December of last year. And also because the market has kind of flatlined when you look at values, you haven't really seen those big jumps in year over year appreciation. Just if you're looking at the same type of property, I might even go back 2 years if there aren't enough comparables, because I have found that pretty much from 2019 until now, yes, there's been huge jumps in between there, but there are a lot of comps in 2019 that are performing the same way today. And I think that's the other, not to segue or go off topic, but that's the other great opportunity for buyers right now is typically it's impossible to outsave the market. But for the first time, it's almost like buyers have the opportunity to go back in time and take advantage of previous year's pricing, yes, at a much higher interest rate, but that's a temporary pain that, might end up serving you very well. And it's less to put down, less inland transfer taxes. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. But to answer your question, I am definitely pulling data far further back than what is normal. And I think the reason why doing that right now is so important is because if you look at the activity from November and December, or Q4 of the last 3 years, actually, the behavior of the market is almost in this perfect pattern where as soon as it hits November, December, things are starting to slow down. I think the only difference this year is I would argue we have far more inventory than we typically will see, especially in the freehold markets. But November and December of last year was also very slow, and the year before that. And so I will use those precedents to both establish value if there aren't enough recent comps, and also just set expectations with my clients so that they can anticipate the level of competition for that specific property type.
That makes complete sense. And Ian, when you're offering on a property in multiple offer scenario, are you able to get away with offering what the property is actually worth on paper? Or are you still having to outbid other buyers by paying a record smashing price for the property? What's your sensibility on that?
It's a case-by-case basis. There was a property a few weeks ago that ended up with 7 or 8 offers, really unique, very special place, really didn't need a lot of work. and great location. So it's that perfect storm of all of these amazing details coming together. That means you may still have to get a little carried away and a little uncomfortable with your bidding price. But generally, places that are a bit more average, that might be in a neighborhood, that's fine. But in a neighborhood where there's lots of other options in an inventory, then yes, you might be well served to basically say, this is what we think it's worth. And that's as far as we're willing to go.
Love that. So let's just recap quickly on prices, just for our condo purchasers and our freehold purchasers out there. So as per the data, we're not seeing drastic drops in pricing. We're not seeing a drastically low percentage to list. I think there is a sense out there due to the clickbait and how the news is reporting about the real estate market that there are bargains to be had. But I could say from, the four of us in our vantage point, we haven't worked with any buyers or sellers where there has been an extreme differential between expectation. So any buyers we've been working with have purchased at a fair price, and any sellers that we've been selling on their behalf have sold at a fair price. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few exceptions. We were able to leverage a sale that was tenanted and it wasn't in great condition that had just occurred, but that sale was $100,000 less than the identical sale that occurred in the summertime. We were able to get her that property $40,000 underneath what it would have sold for just in the summer. So I think but that's just a rare coincidence. I think for the most part, things are selling within market value.
We talk about this a lot. So typically what happens in Toronto is you buy before you sell. And we've seen the market shift very quickly. And there's been two instances, the fall recently being the most recent, where people did not shift appropriately, either by direction of their agents or by some other misdirection because they didn't understand what was happening in the market. And they actually bought first and sold when they should have, in a market like this, sold before they bought. And so the instance that you were talking about, that person happened to have bought before they sold and couldn't sell. They couldn't sell their property, which put them under duress. And so a lot of those people in September, October have been flushed out. And now most of the people who are selling first before they are buying. The market reality has now shifted, which means that most sellers are not selling under duress, which is one of the reasons why, from what we saw in September and October, the market really seems to be stabilizing in terms of pricing. And this is a massive misnomer that seems to be going on rinse and repeat, where people right now are not being forced out of their homes with the banks. The banks are working with people, and most people, they might be tight. They might not be going out to buy the next iPhone or having dinner on College Street 3 nights a week, but they are making their payments and they will continue to be able to make their payments. And if anybody is doubting that, all you have to do is just look at the data coming out with payments under duress. And there are very few people or homeowners or investors who are behind on their payments. So even at this elevated rate, people are still able to make their payments. So the data will indicate that prices year over year are basically stable. What we are seeing, even though there's a softening, prices are relatively stable. Now, the one piece of data that we haven't talked about, which is being reported on ad nauseum in the news, is that there's a tremendous amount of inventory currently on the market, which is true. But as we said earlier, the good inventory is selling. The inventory that's not as desirable is either being terminated or relisted and eventually taken off the market, but not under duress. And I think that's one of the most important things to understand.
Those people who purchase before selling are getting less and less. But I just want to throw out there that twice today, I got an email about a motivated seller from a property that we went to see 3 weeks ago. So I can only assume that they've purchased and they're starting to feel the stress. But even my dog walker showed up today and said, there's another client whose dog I pick up and they're sweating it out because they're in week 3. And I don't think that their agent knows what they're doing. And I know that they bought a new house. So, and I said, well, there's, the only thing they can do is hang on for the ride or reduce their price. But, that was a poor decision to buy first in this market. The other thing I was going to say too is that buyers should know I've got to properties that the sellers are starting to look at other options. So they're not saying, I'm going to keep reducing and reducing. They're saying, okay, well, can I rent this property? Should I move back into it? And there's all kinds of different things that the sellers are now considering instead of lowering the price. Further to Ralph's point, they're feeling the squeeze, but it's not end of days for them. And going back to what Jess was saying too, when you're submitting an offer for a buyer, I think there's still a little bit of respect the seller. So, do as much as you can to have your offer be clean and tidy. And if you can get rid of any conditions beforehand, then do so. It will certainly help you rather than going in with your offer thinking, I have all of the leverage. There's still a little bit of respect that seller. Do what you can to make this look as clean and tidy and as though you're going to close as possible.
Yeah. I'm always of the mindset that if you insult a seller from the onset, you're basically completely robbing your chance of even getting anywhere with them.
Yeah. It's going to be harder to claw
back.
back.
Many clients are like, well, let's just start as low as possible. And I have to remind them that the seller is not under any obligation to work with us. They can simply reject our offer flat out, and then trying to come back after with our tail between our legs won't look very good. So if we're going to end up at X anyway, why not do everything you can to get that dialogue going and state your case? I find that if you started from a less hostile position, the seller is going to be more inclined to want to negotiate with you, even if they didn't even plan on going that low, because of the conversation that you're starting. So I think putting yourself in a position where you can build that rapport with the seller via the listing agent and state your cases that will, with your swords down, it will allow people to actually listen to you and try to understand your position. And that to me is how you get deals done far better than trying to pull teeth and insulting them and telling them why their property sucks and why you should get it for $100,000 less.
For sure.
It's never a good strategy.
The most important thing to understand is that because we've been in such an extreme seller's market, being in a balanced market or slightly in a buyer's market is actually the way healthy markets operate.
Yeah.
And it's how most real estate transactions occur in this type of environment. That does not mean that the market is crashing and you could go around and just lowball people 30, 40% of value and think you're going to get anywhere. You're going to end up wasting a whole lot of everybody's time. And so values are still pretty clear. Value ranges haven't really changed. And I think it's really important to know that if a seller feels like you're trying to take advantage of them, that will be very detrimental to you doing what you're intending to do, which is acquire the property. Now, if you want to come in low or you want to do certain things, it's really important to have your agent advocating you and positioning the offer in advance as best of way possible, as opposed to making a seller feel like there's someone else is trying to steal your home or take advantage of you because we might be entering into a slight recession and interest rates are high.
Totally. I know that we got a really low ball offer on one of the condo listings that Ralph and I listed together, and the offer was ridiculously low, and we just didn't even bother signing back. And we're like, we just let it expire. And the seller was like, I'll just wait for something a little healthier. He was not expecting the world either. He was just expecting a healthy offer.
Yes.
I would also like to speak to the fact that, I do personally work more on the listing end. I would say that our sellers are a bit more receptive than ever to work with offers that do have conditions, as long as all of you mentioned that it is presented in a way that is perhaps a win-win for everybody. So I don't see the conditions if that's something that your buyer needs to pad their offer with. And I want to get into conditions a bit more and break that down. I don't think that's a bad thing in this market. And I think sellers more than ever are happy to see pen to paper and have something to work with, as long as they're working with reasonable buyer agents and reasonable buyers. Would you guys both agree? All of you agree?
Yes.
Ralph, do you want to talk about conditions a bit more? I think it'd be really helpful for our viewers to further understand what they may or may not be able to do with conditions in this current market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to what I said earlier, a healthy market environment, it's really representative of the fact that in this current market environment, you can actually put in conditions and have the time to do proper due diligence before acquiring a property. Typically in Toronto, when properties sell on 0 days on the market or 1 day or 30 multiple offers or whatever the madness is that we normally operate under, a buyer really doesn't have a lot of opportunity and or much time to get things right and to feel confident about the decision that they're making. So one of the amazing aspects to being a buyer in a healthy market like the one that we're in now is oftentimes you have more time or you have more ability to actually move forward and add conditions to your offer that you just wouldn't normally have, and even sometimes renegotiate in your condition period because you're the only buyer that's out there. Whereas in a condition period, if things come up either on a home inspection or in a status review or in finance or whatever the issues are that arise, the seller's going to be like, listen, I got 3 people calling my agent who want the property, so I'm not budging. But in this instance, in this time period, when issues come up, sellers are much more agreeable to having dialogue to negotiate further in that conditional period to get that football across the finish line. So, Jess and Ian, maybe I'll start with you, Ian. What type of conditions are you seeing with your offers right now that you wouldn't normally see as a buyer agent?
The big two are obvious, right? The home inspection and the finance. Mm-hmm. And with home inspection, of course, comes on the condo side, the status review, where people are submitting offers, finding out whether or not they can reach a deal with the seller before investing in that due diligence. So a home inspection can cost you $500, $600, $700, $800. And they're saying, I don't want to do this until we've had the conversation with pen on paper about price. Mm-hmm. If we can figure out where we're going to land here, if you just let me do this other business after that, then we can proceed with this. And sellers are happy to see that. And the condition of finance, obviously, everybody's a bit worried about their lender's opinion of what they've paid for a property because pricing is so wonky right now. So making sure that everybody's on board with what's been proposed.
So I think in addition to what Ian said about the obvious conditions, financing and home inspection, the other thing that I'm seeing that's not necessarily a condition, but specific clauses asking for things to be done, like holes being patched or appliances to be swapped out if they're not working. These are all things that would have immediately have been crossed out in any competitive market. And I find that sellers for the first time are amenable to doing small improvements around a property in order to get the deal done. And that to me is so refreshing because I think that was one of the hardest conversations I would have to have with buyers when the markets were very competitive because no one really talks about how little leverage a purchaser has. And I think people misconstrue resale for brand new construction and they come to the table with the expectation that everything is going to be pristine. But the reality of the situation is in most instances in Toronto, you're assuming 100-plus-year-old home. And with that is going to be a lot of reasonable wear and tear. And I do believe that a purchaser should move into a property with everything, for the most part, in good working order, which that's a standard clause, yes, but it's those nuanced little details like when the seller removes all the artwork and there's a bunch of holes in the wall, which is usually
their TV mount.
Yeah, that's the biggest point of contention for sure. And I think before sellers could have cared less to do any of those little fixes. And now they are very ready and willing to address any specific concerns or requests that a purchaser might have.
100%. I know that we just worked on a deal in Midtown in Chaplin Estates, and the sellers were very happy to work with the buyers and with us on those small fixes that popped up in the home inspection that were really, really important to the buyer, just so that they felt that they were being respected in the process, that they were just getting a little bit more bang for their buck. And also just, they didn't have to deal with it. They were just like, I know these aren't big things. Mm-hmm. I just don't want to acquire a property of this size and then move in and then have so many little things to deal with. It would just be nice to move in with, 2 young kids and be able to enjoy the property. And I thought that the sellers were very reasonable in working through that amendment in that agreement through that conditional period, which was something I know Ralph and I haven't done for a very long time. So it was good to see that. I completely agree, Jess.
That also sort of ties into what I was saying before about respect the seller. So there's sort of that, if you go in trying to lowball at the beginning, but then later say, hey, by the way, before you leave, but you have this bad blood between the buyer and the seller because of you trying to dig in really hard at the beginning and get a great deal, then those little things you ask for along the way in that period between a deal being struck and closing can be just turned down like, you know what, we actually really don't like you and we don't feel like we need to help you because of how this started out and we just have this bad, I'm not sure what the word is, like taste in our mouths about this deal because you tried to, take advantage of us, like Ralph said.
Well, perhaps a good way to look at it when you're negotiating as a buyer in this market is not so focused on the price. It's focused on a fair price for both the buyers and the sellers, knowing that you don't have to overpay or pay some ridiculous over the top number. You'll have the time to do your due diligence. You'll have the time to do your communication with the seller and the seller's agent. And it's these other things that you can use your toolkit. That's what I really want to focus on today in your back pocket to really leverage this market. So we talked about the fact that you may have some wiggle room on the price. You may have the opportunity to add these conditions into your offer, which can be really helpful to your process because you can make sure everything's cool with the bank. You can make sure that those home inspection fixes are perhaps looked after, or you just feel more sound about the property in general. You have time to look at the status certificate with your real estate lawyer in more detail. If anything as red flagged there, you can work through that with the seller as well. So there's opportunities here to leverage the market beyond just the ticket price. And I think there's some other things here that we should talk about that may be agreeable to sellers in this market that we have not seen before, including rental contracts, rental buyouts, longer closings, and longer closing periods. So, Jess, do you want to talk about these rental contracts we often see for hot water tanks, furnaces, AC units?
They are very often a point of contention, especially when they're not fully disclosed at the time that a property is being marketed for sale. We have had a handful of buyers that didn't want to assume a rental contract for a hot water tank or security system and wanted the ability to purchase their own or have it bought out already. And I know that in previous markets that we've grown so accustomed to, a seller could really care less and, sort of take it or leave it. And now the willingness of a seller to meet the expectations of the buyer is so wonderful. And I think one of those examples is having the seller buy out that contract so you're not having to assume a decision that they made that might not benefit you in the same way. And so I think that's also really huge. And it just makes the overall transaction far more pleasant. And you feel like you're in more control as a buyer of the purchase that you're making. And so I think it's just the overall landscape is far more enjoyable. And if you focus on that part of it, as opposed to, am I getting a steal of a deal? It'll allow you to sort of cut through the noise and make better decisions. Because realistically, we'll probably look back at the prices today in a few months from now or a year from now, whenever it is, and it will be a steal of a deal. So I think as long as you're thinking long term, it's less about, the $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 that you're saving. It's more about getting a transaction done on your terms while protecting yourself, utilizing the clauses available to you and the conditions available to you, and just leaning into that and taking advantage of that, because as it might seem like it's standard, it is a luxury that most buyers who bought in the last 3, 4, 5+ years would have killed to have. So unless you've been in that type of scenario, I don't think you can fully appreciate just how wonderful it is to be a little bit picky and have time and make certain requests and have those requests being fulfilled.
Buyers are not only being listened to, they're actually being heard. for the first time in many
Yeah.
years.
Yep. And just to give the viewers some numbers behind these rental contracts, just to close the loop on that. So a hot water tank buyout could be anywhere between like $500 to $1,000. A security system, probably they just need to close the contract with a provider. And then these furnace and AC contracts can be up to $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So that's just something to keep in your back pocket, buyers. If you're considering offering on something with a rental contract, that's a really good negotiating tool that's very fair to ask for, is to ask to have those rental contracts purchased or bought out before you close and to see that documentation come from the seller on or before closing. I think that's an amazing thing to leverage right now. Let's talk about these longer closing periods. So typically in Toronto, I'd say a closing is usually 30 to 60 days. And then everyone moves to their next property. Ian, are you seeing buyers asking for more time on their closings? And if so, and I'm talking like 90 to 120 days, if so, why would a longer closing be an advantage to a buyer in this market?
Unless there's something I'm not thinking of, and there very well could be, I was going to say that the longer close, it might be an offering to the seller who, if they're doing this the right way, has not determined where they're going yet. The buyer may be a renter. Maybe they have to give 60 days to the landlord. The buyer's going to have their own reasons for basically what they're asking for. But in a lot of cases, the sellers are asking for that because they haven't taken that next step yet. They're waiting to sell before they make their plan to go forward. So that's more often than not why I'm seeing 90 plus closing periods.
Typically in a seller's market, the buyers are always trying to meet as much of the seller's expectations as possible. And theoretically, because they've already bought, they are looking for a quicker close. But now that we've had this shift, most sellers are looking to stretch out as long as they can so that they have the opportunity to have the time to actually purchase or acquire a property. And it's, if you're a buyer, there are so many life events that could be going on in this type of market causing you to buy, like another child, like a transition at work. There could be life changes. There could be all types of reasons. And those reasons probably may benefit a buyer as well, looking for longer close. So I definitely say that we're seeing lots of mutually agreed upon, mutually beneficial longer close scenarios for both buyers and sellers. And also, if you're a buyer and you believe that we're at the end of the rate hike cycle, then you might be expecting to see the same or even lesser rates further out in the future, which could definitely benefit a buyer as well.
And there's always the opportunity, if the seller ends up purchasing in that longer closing period, they can always go back to that buyer in that 90 and 121 day period and say, hey, we ended up purchasing something. Is there any interest to you to close earlier now? And you can always amend the closing date if agreeable to buyer and seller after you firm up on a deal. So keep that dialogue open because it is a domino effect. Everyone's trying to move from one property to another, and making all of that perfect is very difficult to do. But I find that people are pretty flexible when you make that request. So it's always worth tossing it out there. And again, that goes back to what we've been saying at the beginning. You keep your communication great with the listing agent when you're acting on behalf of the buyer. And then perhaps they might do you a favor with shifting closing dates down the road.
The experience and communication ability of your agent is super, super important right now.
I've actually found that the communication from agents has multiplied by 10 at the beginning of 2021. You couldn't get a hold of a listing agent if your life depended on it. And now
unless you were calling
I'm
us.
getting texts reminding me of the appointment, after the appointment, about price changes, about a reminder about the price change, about a reminder that it's still on the market. And I'm like, wow, this is wonderful. But you can see that level of desperation now from the listing agents who, their entire roles have evolved, just like our roles as a buyer agent has evolved. I mean, I felt like in hot markets, I had to stop people from making hasty decisions that could not benefit them and make sure that they were protected while moving expeditiously. But now I find that sort of the art of the deal is more important than ever. And I have an ability to show off my negotiation skills. And that's so nice to see. And really, that's what your agents should be doing. But we've just been robbed of that dialogue, like I said, for so long. Whether you were an expert negotiator or not, you didn't really have an opportunity to demonstrate those skills. And now you do.
While this is challenging, it's also refreshing.
I cannot tell you how many properties in a hot market that we've sold as listing agents where we've never even spoken to or heard the buyer agent's voice. Like, it's all just been like via text. Hey, sending offer now. Got it. And now we're getting these calls. Hey man, what's going on? How's your property going? What's your seller's expectations? Have you had any showings? Like those conversations are happening much more. And it's just hilarious because when the market is at that type of feverish pace, so many times you never even hear the other agent's voice, which I just think is just interesting comparative to the environment that we're in now.
Agents have voices. Oh my God.
I also think a part of that too is because of the natural filtering process that occurs when markets experience a bit of a downturn. And I think that the overall quality of agents who are active right now is on average a lot higher than what we're used to seeing. And so I think that also contributes to that improved communication as well.
Which is also refreshing.
Yes.
Very much so.
Okay, one last point just in terms of what you can maybe leverage in your offer as a buyer. And Ralph and I have talked about this offline so many times, and this comes to inclusions and exclusions in an offer. So for our viewers out there, oftentimes a seller in their listing will list things that are included. Common things would be the appliances, built-ins, the laundry washer and dryer, central vac. All of these things would be common things that would be included. Your garage door remote would be an inclusion. And then exclusions are a little bit more personal sometimes, like a light fixture that the sellers really love, or their custom drapery that they have in their home. There'll be certain things that are laid out as exclusions. And sometimes there is a gray area with inclusions and exclusions. And often, buyers can get a little bit pissed off about these if they go move into the home and then they notice that the nanny cameras aren't there, or the ladder to the second story loft is no longer there. And some things that just were not listed as either one or the other, and they do not become part of the agreement in purchase and sale. And then for some reason, everyone just blows up about these like tiny minutia things which are included or excluded. And I can't even tell you how many times Ralph and I are like, we'll just buy you the nanny cams. We'll just buy you a ladder. Like, we've just got to make this problem go away. So do you think right now this is an opportunity for buyers to include more in terms of things they may want with the home, like the pool equipment, Jess, or perhaps a piece of furniture that they really adored when they walked through the property, or perhaps a painting they saw in the washroom? Do you think this is something that buyers can leverage? Is there any point of them exploring that? And what are your thoughts on that, Jess?
Definitely. And I think that's a really excellent point that I didn't even think of myself. But back to the whole dialogue thing, that's the beauty of having a conversation with a seller. And you can now ask for these things. And the worst that happens is they say no. But people don't realize how much of contentious point the inclusions and exclusions are on every single deal, because it's impossible to, as a buyer, especially when you're walking through there within 5 minutes and then having to make a decision, understand what is going to be included and what you need to specifically ask for. A very common one is TV wall mounts. Every single time, sellers think they shouldn't be included. Buyers think that they should, because they are technically fixed to the wall. And so what I've just been doing with my clients in any market is we go through room by room and I say, I want you to just point out everything that you think you may want in this room. And I make it as specific as possible in the agreement of purchase and sale. I even put all bathroom mirrors and all light bulbs, because I've seen sellers take those too. So I think
perfect example.
Yeah. So I think the more specific you can be in that section, the better in any market. But definitely if there's something obscure in a home that you would be interested in as a purchaser, that you would want to see included in a sale, I think the likelihood of you actually getting it is far higher today than it was before.
Excellent.
Now we have the luxury of time too. Buyers are actually going to properties in some cases 2-3 times, right?
Yes.
And spending half an hour, 45 minutes looking. So instead of that 5 minute, we got to run through here because we got to put an offer together because a bully was just push forward and we have an hour and I've got to get back to my desk and do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
We've got the opportunity to say, is this in? Is this out? This and that. And we've got 40 MLS pictures in most listings these days too. And I can't tell you the number of times I go back to those photos
Yes.
when preparing an offer for a buyer to say, hey, did you think about this? Should we ask for this? Or the seller actually missed the dishwasher. Is there a reason why the dishwasher wasn't in the inclusions? Are they planning on taking that? Let's ask the question. Let's figure this out. So the luxury of time, again, helping the buyer.
100%.
So one of the things, this is actually a little bit of a side rant here. When I read the comments on our YouTube channel, a lot of people have some interesting ideas, maybe hopes, but I'm just going to sweep it all down in one shot. Interest rates are not going to go up to 15%, and the housing market in Toronto is not going to crash by 45%. So if you're watching this, deal with it. So now that we've put that aside, the reality is that we're in a very interesting time in the market right now, which is caused by interest rates being where they are at, which is a very, 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 very steep increase or incline in a very short period of time. The market, while soft, is stable. And there's a lot of people that think that, from economists to banks, that think that we're at the end of the rate cycle and rates are going to start to come down sooner rather than later. So understanding that we are in a rate-driven environment and understanding that the consensus is, for a whole bunch of reasons, that we're at the end of it, the question really is how long is this window going to last until we start to see things return to more normal levels in the way in which the Toronto real estate market operates in. And a lot of these advantages that we've discussed that buyers have will start to disappear or get taken away one by one by one. So I'm going to open this up to both Ian and Jess. Whoever wants to go first, feel free. But what do you guys think? What do you see in terms of this window that we're in, and how long you guys think it will last?
I always look to history as a guide. And like I said earlier in the podcast, what we are seeing and hearing in terms of the overall market climate right now is not dissimilar to Q4 of 2022 and even 2021 and 2020. And in December of the end of all of those years, the overall feeling was that things were going to continue to dip or stay pretty dormant and quiet. And then as soon as we got into February, it seemed like that herd mentality was, oh, there's all of these deals to be had, because the stats on December are always published in January. And then everyone thinks that they're going to be the first brilliant mind to come to the table and take advantage of these low prices. And then everyone's competing again. I think that there's a good chance that will happen. But if interest rates come down, I think we're pretty much guaranteed to see a boost in activity and prices climbing exponentially because of just how much pent-up demand there is and how little supply we continue to have as a city.
My estimate on this is that the fall market of 2024 will be probably the first market to see a possible decrease in the rates. But if for any reason one of them happens and it happens to coincide with the spring market, wow, I can only imagine what'll happen in April and May if there is actually one decrease before then. I don't think that's likely to happen, but if it does, that would kind of start a big reaction. But I do think, end of 2024, beginning of 2025, this window of opportunity will be closing.
I think I'm in between Jess and Ian, actually. So I think we just need to see a slight movement with the interest rates coming down. I think the possibility of that will be Q2 of next year. As soon as we see a tiny movement down, like just a little notch in the belt, that will be enough psychology shift for buyers to start moving into the market and move in fast. And we all know that Toronto buyers work on a FOMO mentality. And once one person goes, the herd will follow. And then it just takes that one little flourish to happen. And then I think we will be back almost at the same pace by over the summer, for sure. I think this little window, buyers, you don't really have that much time left. The clock is ticking.
Yes.
And you have the end of this year, for sure Q1 next year. And then at that point in time, I think that's when things can start slipping from your fingertips. Ralph, what do you think?
All we have to do is look at last year. This time last year was, as Jessica was saying, was a very depressed time in the market. January 2023, the Bank of Canada came out. They didn't even reduce. They just said, we're pausing for an indefinite period of time and we're giving stability and certainty, which has been lacking over the course of the last year. And we all know what happened. The market just shot up and all the demand that was sitting in the sidelines piled back in. We saw 2 successive increases of 25 basis points in June and July, which seemed to sort of put the market on hold for a little bit, or really, really seemed to slow things down. But all we have to do is get the overnight lending rate into around the 400s and just a 4 in front.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already seen what could happen because we don't have to look further than April or May of last year. And so I think it's a 2-pronged aspect. I think the first is getting just stability and people knowing that that the cycle is done, that the bank is signaling for a period of time people can understand what the rules of the game are. I think that will be level 1. And then you'll start to see a lot of the pent-up demand of people sitting on the sidelines for the last 6 months start to become more engaged. And then when you see those rates start to come down, which they will, it's difficult to say exactly, but you'll see another level of activity. And in lieu of another 1 million people moving to Canada over the next year, prices will start to go up. And I think we're probably looking at, from everything that I'm seeing and thinking, I think rates are going to start coming down sooner than people believe and sooner than what the consensus is saying. We have $1 trillion of mortgages about to renew in the next year and a half. And that's going to put a massive drag, not on the actual mortgage system, but I think it'll put a drag on the economy because I think people will continue to make payments just like they are. Banks will extend out amortizations, but they'll cut back elsewhere. And I think the Bank of Canada has acted super aggressively trying to get ahead of this, knowing that they'll have to start reducing as we enter into a recession and GDP contraction. So I think it's definitely coming sooner than most people think. And it'll be interesting to see how things play out. I think the back half of 2024 is going to be very interesting. And 2025 might be one of the best years we've ever seen in Toronto real estate, 2021 included.
Wow, I love these predictions. This has been a great discussion. I hope our buyers have found useful tools for their toolkit when buying in a more balanced market. Ian, would you like to take us home today?
Absolutely. We hope you found our discussion on the power of negotiation informative. For more insights and updates, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us create content in real time that resonates with your real estate interests. This has been the Toronto Real Estate Podcast with the team at Fox Marin. Until next time, keep navigating the market with knowledge and confidence. Corey, what do you like to tell our viewers?
I love to tell our viewers that they can contact us anytime because we are super nice.
And Ralph, what would you like our viewers to do before they leave?
We just really love you for watching and tuning in, and hopefully you can share some of that love back and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below. And if it's constructive, and I mean constructive, by the way, interest rates are not going to 15% if you're watching this, please be sure to comment below. We'd absolutely love to hear from you, and we can't wait to see you all again next week.